It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life. Balloons swayed gently in the breeze. Kids laughed and ran around the backyard, and the smell of cake filled the air. It was a sunny afternoon in May 1991, and Claire had planned the perfect birthday party for her son, Daniel, who had just turned 6. She remembered the way he smiled that morning, how excited he was to see his friends, to open his presents, to blow out his candles. It was the kind of day that gets captured in photos and held close for years. But by sunset, that perfect day turned into every parent's worst nightmare. Daniel was gone. No one saw him leave. No one heard a cry for help. He was there one moment, running around with a balloon sword in hand, and in the next, he had vanished without a trace. The other kids thought he was playing hide-and-seek. The adults assumed he'd wandered inside to grab a juice box. But as the minutes stretched into hours, panic set in. The backyard, the house, the neighborhood, all of it was searched over and over again. Police were called, search dogs brought in, even helicopters hovered above the nearby woods. But nothing. It was as if Daniel had simply disappeared into thin air. The story made headlines for days. Reporters crowded outside the house, neighbors brought casseroles and candles, and strangers mailed letters of support. But for Claire, none of that mattered. Her little boy was missing, and the silence he left behind was louder than anything she'd ever known. For weeks, she didn't sleep. She replayed every second of that day in her mind, trying to figure out what went wrong. She blamed herself. Did she look away too long? Did she miss a warning sign? The police kept searching, but as time passed, their visits became less frequent. The headlines faded. The world moved on. Claire did not. Every year on Daniel's birthday, Claire kept the tradition alive. She baked his favorite cake, set out a place for him at the table, and played the home videos they had recorded when he was still with them. She refused to accept that he was just gone. There was no evidence, no body, no explanation. Just a hole in her life that nothing could fill. She kept his room exactly as it was. She kept his toys in their boxes. And on the hardest days, she would sit in his room and talk to him, as if he were still somewhere close, just out of reach. Then, 10 years later, something happened that shook everything up again. It was an ordinary Saturday in the summer of 2001. Claire had driven to a nearby neighborhood to check out a yard sale. She didn't really need anything, but something about browsing through old things gave her a strange sense of comfort. As she wandered through rows of books, clothes, and dusty electronics, her eyes landed on something that made her freeze. Sitting on a small plastic table was a teal Game Boy Color, the same model she had bought for Daniel just days before his disappearance. Her heart started racing. It couldn't be, she thought. But as she picked it up, her fingers trembling, she saw "Eat" on the back of the device. In tiny, uneven letters was Daniel's name, scratched in the way only a child would write. Claire's world shifted in that moment. A wave of emotions hit her: shock, confusion, hope, fear. She asked the woman running the sale where the Game Boy had come from. The answer was vague, almost dismissive. "Oh, stuff from a storage unit. We cleared out," she said. The woman had no idea who owned it before. No names, no address, nothing. Claire bought it instantly and rushed home, hands shaking the whole drive. She spent the rest of that day staring at the Game Boy, afraid to even turn it on. It was like holding a message from the past. Eventually, she pressed the power button. The screen flickered, and a familiar game loaded up, one Daniel used to play all the time. But what caught her off guard wasn't the game, it was the saved data. The file name wasn't just a random set of initials or a player name. It read, "I'm okay." Claire couldn't believe what she was seeing. Was this Daniel's way of reaching out? Had he somehow found a way to send a message through a video game? She took the device to the police, who reopened the case, but the Game Boy raised more questions than answers. Where had it been all these years? Who had it before it ended up at that yard sale? Was Daniel alive somewhere, trying to make contact in the only way he could? Over the next few weeks, more clues started to emerge. Claire began to find small objects that reminded her of Daniel, his favorite toy car left on her porch, a crayon drawing slipped into her mailbox, a voice on an old answering machine that sounded almost too familiar. Nothing that could be traced, nothing that made sense. But everything pointed to one terrifying possibility. Someone out there knew something as investigators looked deeper. They uncovered a trail of other missing children from nearby towns, each with small, almost overlooked connections, similar toys, same dates, same areas. Could this be bigger than just Daniel's case? Had he been taken by someone who had done this before? And if so, why now? Why 10 years later? Why leave these clues? Claire's life was thrown back into chaos, but this time it was different. This time, there was hope. She didn't know where the trail would lead, but she knew she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the first real sign in 10 years had landed in her hands, wrapped in dusty plastic at a stranger's yard sale. And just when she thought things couldn't get more strange, a letter arrived in her mailbox. No return address, no stamp, just a plain envelope with one sentence written inside. You were never supposed to find it. What did that mean? Was it a warning, a threat, or another piece of the puzzle? Whatever it was, one thing was certain. This story was far from over. Claire held the envelope tightly in her hand, her fingers trembling as she read those chilling words over and over again. You were never supposed to find it. Her mind raced. Who had sent it? How did they know she had the Game Boy? And why? Would anyone want to keep her from finding it? That one sentence changed everything. Until then, she had believed maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe Daniel had somehow dropped it. Maybe someone had unknowingly sold it. But this message made one thing terrifyingly clear. Someone was watching. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat on her couch, the Game Boy resting on the coffee table in front of her, the letter beside it like a warning. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second dragging heavier than the last. Shit. Back to the party, the balloons, the cake, the little pirate hat Daniel wore. It all seemed like a dream now, blurry around the edges. But there was one memory that kept rising to the surface. A man standing just outside the fence that day. She had only noticed him for a moment, thought he was someone's uncle or maybe a curious neighbor. He had a camera. She remembered because she thought it was strange for someone she didn't know to be taking pictures of children. She had never told anyone about him. At the time, it didn't seem important. But now, the memory sent a chill down her spine. Over the next few days, Claire became more alert. She noticed things she hadn't before, the same blue van parked across the street 3 days in a row. A figure walking a dog past her house at the same time every night. A feeling that someone was following her in the grocery store. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe her mind was playing tricks, but the fear felt real. So she went back to the police with the letter. They took it seriously this time. The officer in charge, Detective Harris, agreed to have the handwriting analyzed and the envelope checked for prints, but Claire could tell by the look in his eyes that he didn't expect to find much. Too much time had passed, too many dead ends. And yet, something about this case was different now. Claire also began digging into her own memories, trying to remember every detail about the day Daniel vanished. She looked through old photo albums, scanned home videos from the party frame by frame. In one clip, taken just minutes before Daniel disappeared, she paused and leaned closer to the screen. There, in the background, barely visible, was a figure standing by the back gate. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't part of the party. He was just Watching, she froze the frame and stared at the grainy image. The same unease washed over her. It had to be the man with the camera. Feeling a sudden surge of urgency, Claire took the tape to the detective. He promised to enhance the image and run it through facial recognition, but warned her it might take time. Too long, Claire thought. Whoever this person was, he wasn't done. She began doing her own research. She went online, posted in forums dedicated to missing persons, reached out to other families. One evening, she got a private message from a woman in another state. Her son had disappeared in 1990, just a year before Daniel. The circumstances were eerily similar. Vanished during a family event. No trace, no witnesses. The only thing left behind was a toy airplane that appeared months later in a donation box across town. It had her son's name scratched into the bottom. Claire and the woman, whose name was Lisa, began talking regularly. They compared details, timelines, locations. They discovered that a third boy had vanished in 1992, this time during a camping trip. His parents later received a postcard with just 2 words, "Still here." That boy's favorite handheld game console had also resurfaced years later at a flea market in another city. It was too specific to be a coincidence. These weren't isolated cases. This was a pattern. Claire created a map and began plotting all the known cases. She saw that the disappearances formed a rough circle, all within a few hundred miles of each other. It wasn't perfect, but it hinted at a route or a territory. Could someone have been moving from town to town, targeting specific children? The thought made her sick, but it also pushed her forward. If there was a pattern, maybe there was a clue hiding inside it. She continued searching, desperate for any piece of the puzzle that might bring her closer to Daniel. Then one day, another envelope arrived. No handwriting this time, just a printed photo inside. It showed a row of lockers, old, rusty, clearly abandoned. There was no note, no return address. On the back, someone had written a number. 18. Galère showed the photo to Detective Harris, who said it looked like it might be from an old train station or school. But there were hundreds of places like that. Without more information, it was another dead end? Or maybe it was an invitation. Despite Harris's warnings, Claire drove out the next morning and began checking old buildings. She visited train depots, storage facilities, even a few run-down schools. She carried the photo in her purse, pulling it out at each stop, comparing it to the surroundings. After hours of searching, she arrived at an abandoned community center, just outside town. The front was boarded up, but a side door had been forced open. Claire stepped inside, heart pounding. The air was thick with dust, and every sound echoed. She made her way down a long hallway until she reached what looked like an old locker room, and there they were. Lockers, lined up just like in the photo. Her hands shook as she counted them. 1, 2, 3, until she reached 18. It was locked. Claire looked around, then pulled out a hairpin from her pocket. She had never done anything like this before, but desperation makes people braver than they realize. After several tense minutes, the lock gave way with a soft click. Inside was a single object, a photograph. It was old and slightly faded. It showed a group of children, maybe 10 or 12, sitting at a picnic table. And there, near the center, was a boy Claire would recognize anywhere. Neil. He looked older, maybe 8 or 9, but it was him. He was staring directly at the camera, unsmiling, with a blankness in his eyes that broke Claire's heart. She backed away slowly, tears filling her eyes, her thoughts spinning. This meant he had been alive, possibly still was. But where was he who had taken the picture? And what were they trying to tell her? As Claire stood in that cold, forgotten building, the wind howled through the cracks in the walls, as if whispering the truth just out of reach. the story wasn't over. It was only beginning. Claire left the old community center with the photograph pressed tightly against her chest, her heart pounding louder than ever. She didn't know whether to feel hope, fear, or something in between. Seeing Daniel again in an old photo shattered the numbness she had built over the years. He had been alive. Someone had kept him hidden. But why? And for how long? That night, she spread all her clues across the dining table. The Game Boy, the 2 envelopes, the printed photo, the new picture from Locker 18, and her map of the disappearances. Everything seemed connected, yet nothing made sense completely. Her mind kept looping the same questions. Who had sent these things? What were they trying to say? And why now, after all these years? Detective Harris was growing more involved too, though he remained cautious. He had the photograph scanned, trying to match the location through background details, objects, even tree species. Meanwhile, Claire posted the image in a private online group for cold case investigators. Within a day, someone replied, claiming, "The picnic tables looked exactly like the ones at a long-closed camp for troubled youth 3 towns over." The camp had shut down in the early 90s, just a year after Daniel disappeared. Claire didn't wait. She got into her car before sunrise and drove to the place. The entrance was overgrown, the sign barely hanging, but the grounds were still there, quiet, forgotten. She followed the narrow path until she saw them. The same picnic tables, the same trees, the same view from the picture. Her hands trembled as she took out her phone and snapped photos. She couldn't explain it, but she knew this place held something. As she moved deeper into the woods behind the camp, she found a few decaying cabins. One door swung open when she touched it, revealing dusty beds and torn mattresses. There was graffiti on the walls, old clothes scattered on the floor. And in one corner, small journal. Most of the pages were ruined, water-damaged, or too faded to read. But on one page, scribbled in pencil, was a name, D. And below it, a message that gave her goosebumps. "We aren't allowed to leave. He watches us." Claire brought the journal to Harris, who started checking records on the camp. The property had once been run by a private organization, supposedly for children with behavioral problems. But Claire suspected that was just a cover. There were no proper school files, no parental visit records, just a shell of a facility that had been quietly abandoned. While the detective followed legal paths, Claire kept pushing her own. She reconnected with Lisa, the mother, whose son had disappeared a year before Daniel, and together they dug deeper. They found another parent, Mark. His daughter vanished in 1994. She was last seen at a playground a few miles from that same camp. Mark had received no clues, no items, no letters until Claire told him about the Game Boy. Mark froze. He remembered something. A month after his daughter disappeared, he had received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape. He never listened to it. He was too heartbroken, and it scared him. He thought it was some cruel joke. But now he brought it to Claire. They played the tape together. It was scratchy, distorted. But about 2 minutes in, a child's voice could be heard. Soft, frightened. "Are you recording this? Don't let him hear. He gets mad when we talk to the outside." Then static. Claire couldn't breathe. It was confirmation. These children were taken, held somewhere, silenced. But who was he? And why take children just to keep them hidden? A new theory formed in Claire's mind. This wasn't random. The toys, the letters, the clues, they weren't just memories. They were messages. Someone from inside was trying to reach out. A survivor, maybe. Someone who remembered Daniel, maybe even Daniel himself. But how? At the same time, she started to notice another disturbing pattern. Every one of the families she spoke to had something in common. Each of their children was unusually gifted. Some were brilliant at puzzles, others at music or computers. Daniel had been obsessed with codes and patterns from a very young age. Claire used to laugh when he tried to decode cereal boxes at the breakfast table. Could that be why they were taken? The idea was terrifying, but it made sense. Someone had been watching these children, identifying them, and then removing them. Maybe for research, maybe for something darker. The truth was still buried, but the edges were starting to show. One night, Claire received a call from a blocked number. She almost didn't answer, but something in her gut told her to pick up. The voice on the other end was low, shaken, and young Mrs. Thompson. The voice said, "Don't trust the next letter. It's not from me." Before she could speak, the line went dead. Claire dropped the phone, her entire body frozen. She knew that voice. She would recognize it anywhere. It was Daniel. She called Harris, frantic, and they traced the call payphone miles away already. Abandoned when police arrived. But now Claire knew Daniel was out there. Not just a memory, not just a face in a photograph. He was alive. And he was trying to warn her. The next morning, a new envelope arrived. Just like the other's no return address, plain white, single item inside. This time, it was a drawing. A child's sketch of a room with barred windows, a cracked ceiling, and 4 beds. One figure in the corner had his back turned. Another sat crying. One was lying down, and the 4th was drawing. Claire stared at it, heart pounding. She knew this wasn't just art. It was a map. A message, and then she noticed something ate on the edge of the paper. Almost hidden in the fold was a small string of numbers. 47.3891-122.2.458. Coordinates. She plugged them into her phone. It pointed to a stretch of forest 2 towns over, near an old lumber yard. The area had been off limits for years after a fire. No one went there anymore. Claire looked at the map, then back at the drawing. Her instinct screamed at her. This was the place. She didn't tell the police. Not yet. She wanted to go first, to see it herself. If Daniel had left this for her, she had to follow it. She packed a flashlight, snacks, water, and a small notebook. Before leaving, she left a voicemail for Detective Harris, just in case. Then she got in her car and started driving toward the place. The coordinates led her dot as the trees grew denser and the road turned rough. She felt the weight of the past 10 years pressing down on her. Every mile brought her closer, not just to a place, but to a truth she had never stopped chasing. And deep down, Claire knew. What she was about to find would change everything. The forest was silent. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, unnatural kind that makes your skin crawl. Claire parked her car at the edge of the old dirt road, just past the rusted "No Trespassing" sign. She stepped out, clutching the drawing tightly in one hand and her flashlight in the other. According to the coordinates, she was just under half a mile from the spot. The trees loomed above her, their branches twisted and tangled, blotting out most of the fading daylight. It felt like the forest didn't want her there. Every step she took crunched against dry leaves and twigs, each sound echoing louder than it should have. The path was overgrown, barely visible, but her phone's GPS confirmed she was moving in the right direction. Her heart pounded faster the deeper she went. She kept glancing over her shoulder, unsure if she was being followed, or if her imagination had simply gone too far. But something about the air, it wasn't just fear, 'twas anticipation. Like the forest itself was holding its breath as she moved closer to the location. She began to see signs that someone or something had been there recently. Branches had been cut. Pieces of tarp clung to broken branches, and faint shoe prints dotted the soft ground. Not old either. These were fresh. Claire slowed down, her senses on high alert. A part of her wanted to turn back, to wait for Detective Harris, But the other part, the mother, who had spent a decade searching for her son, kept moving forward. Then, through the trees, she saw it, an old, half-buried structure. It looked like the remains of a bunker or utility building hidden under layers of dirt and vines. The metal door was partially ajar. She crept closer, flashlight shaking in her hand. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to stop, but she pushed it down. She had come too far. The inside was pitch black, damp, and smelled of mold and rust. She stepped in, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were concrete, scarred with age. There were old chairs, broken furniture, scattered. Cans like people had once stayed there and left in a hurry. Claire scanned every corner, desperate for a clue. Then she saw the door at the back. It was different from the rest, newer, reinforced. She pressed her ear to it. Silence, no movement. But something about it felt significant. She pushed gently, locked. She tried again, harder. Still nothing. But then she noticed a panel next to it, faintly lit with blinking red numbers. A keypad. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out the old drawing again. She stared at the numbers in the corner. It's 47.3891, minus 122.2458. Those were the coordinates, but maybe they were more. She punched in 3,891. Nothing. She tried 2,458. Still nothing. Her mind raced. Then she remembered that on the back of the Game Boy was a faint number scratched into the plastic. One she had dismissed before. She entered it. The red light blinked green. The door clicked open. Claire hesitated for just a second before pulling it open. The room beyond was small, lined with shelves, dusty monitors, and scattered papers. But it was what hung on the wall that made her gasp. Photographs. Dozens of them. Children's, smiling, playing, standing in front of houses, schools, parks. Some photos were marked with red circles. Others had X's. In the center was a large bulletin board covered in maps, notes, and what looked like surveillance logs. At the top of the board, written in thick black marker, were the words, "Subjects chosen. Purpose pending." Claire felt the air leave her lungs. She scanned the photos frantically until she found Daniel's face. Younger, from before the party. Someone had been watching him even before he vanished. Her hands trembled as she pulled the photo down. On the back, there was a date. July 3rd, 1991, just 2 days before his birthday. This wasn't random. Someone had selected him, planned it. Suddenly, Claire heard a sound, soft scraping behind her. She spun around, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Nothing, just the room and the still open door. She stood frozen, listening. Then another sound closer, a whisper. She couldn't make out the words, but it was a voice. Faint, scared. Claire followed it, heart in her throat. It led her to another part of the building behind a broken metal shelf. There was a narrow passage, almost hidden by a fallen beam. She squeezed through, scraping her arms, and emerged into a hallway, dimly lit by emergency lights. The air was colder here. Her breath was visible. She heard it again. The voice, "Hello," Claire whispered, barely able to speak. Silence, then a whisper from the dark. "You found us." She turned the lights slowly and saw them 3 children standing in the shadows, pale, wide-eyed, thin. They looked no older than 10, maybe younger. One of them stepped forward, holding something in his hand. A photo. It was Daniel. Now? 15, maybe. He looked tired, but alive. "He's not here anymore," the boy said softly. "But he left this for you." Claire took the photo, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Where is he?" Before the boy could answer, a loud clanging echoed through the corridor. The children gasped and backed away. The boy whispered again, "He's coming. You need to go." Claire's pulse shot through her chest. The sound was getting louder metal against concrete, deliberate steps. She looked around for an exit. Anything. But the hallway was a dead end, except the narrow crawl space she came through. "Please," she said, turning to the children. "Come with me." They shook their heads in unison. "We can't," one said. "Not yet." Claire didn't understand. "Why?" Before they could respond, a bright light flooded the hall. Heavy footsteps echoed just around the bend. Claire ducked into the crawl space, heart hammering, clutching the photo to her chest. Behind her, the children vanished into the shadows as she crawled back out into the cold forest air. The door slammed shut behind her. She ran. Branches whipped at her arms, her legs burned, but she didn't stop. She made it back to her car, hands trembling so badly she dropped her keys twice before starting the engine. She looked back once at the tree line, no movement, no one following, but she knew. Someone had been there. Someone was still watching. Back at home, Claire locked every door, every window. She stared at the new photo of Daniel. On the back was another message. It read, "I'm not lost, I'm waiting." And beneath that, a date just 3 days away. Claire stared at the date on the back of the photo for hours that night. July 11th, just 3 days away. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, older, changed, but still her boy. The words, "I'm not lost, I'm waiting," repeated in her head like a warning. Or maybe a plea. Either way, she knew this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next morning, she drove straight to Detective Harris's office. She showed him everything. The bunker photos, the new children, the keypad, Daniel's latest message. He listened, quiet but tense. This was no longer just a cold case. It was something bigger, something that had been operating in the shadows for years. "We'll organize a team," he said. "We'll go back with backup." But Claire shook her head. "They'll vanish if you show up with uniforms and sirens. I only found them because they let me. Someone wanted me to see that place." Harris hesitated, then handed her a small device, a GPS tracker. "Then if you go back, you don't go alone. At least let us know where you are." That evening, Claire reviewed everything again. She couldn't shake a feeling she'd been missing something, some connection, some piece that tied it all together. That's when she went back to the original Game Boy. She turned it over, remembering the number etched into the plastic. Then she looked at the cartridge still stuck in it. Tetris. She hadn't tried turning it on since the day she found it. To her surprise, it worked. The screen flickered to life, the familiar chime playing. But something was different. The menu wasn't the standard one. Instead, it showed a single file. "Open Me." Claire's hands trembled as she selected it. The screen changed to rows of numbers, like coordinates or codes. But at the bottom, a message blinked slowly in pixelated letters. "The man with the ring. Watch his hand." Her breath caught. A ring. What did that mean? Who was this message about? She rushed to her box of old party photos from 1991, hoping something might stand out. She flipped through image after image until she saw it one of the adults at Daniel's birthday party. A family friend, or maybe just a neighbor. Claire hadn't thought about him in years, but in the photo, clear as day, was a large silver ring on his right hand. Not just decorative, had a strange symbol on it. Something almost like an eye. Claire sat back, chills running down her spine. The man's name was Mr. Albridge. He lived 2 houses down back then. Quiet, polite. Had helped organize the party. But a few months after Daniel's disappearance, he'd moved away. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. She looked him up online. Nothing. No recent address, no social media. Like he'd vanished, she brought the photo to Harris the next morning. He examined it closely. "That ring?" he said quietly. "I've seen it before." Claire leaned forward. "Where?" He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin file notes from another missing persons case, completely unrelated. To Daniels, a boy taken in 1996. The mother had reported seeing a man at her child's school wearing a strange silver ring with a symbol she couldn't forget. The case had gone cold, just like Daniels. Claire's heart raced. This wasn't about random children. There was a network, a pattern. And Mr. Albridge was part of it. But the twist didn't end there. That night, Claire received another call. This time, it came from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the line was older, raspier, but familiar. "You're getting too close, Claire," it said. "You think this is just about Daniel, but it's not. They're watching you now." Before she could reply, the line went dead. She dropped the phone, panic rising in her chest. Who was that? And how did they know her name? The only people who had her number were Harris, Lisa, and a few close friends. Whoever it was had been following her, listening, maybe even inside her house. Claire immediately went through every window, every door, locking and checking everything. But it didn't calm her nerves. What if they had already been inside? What if they had planted something? She didn't sleep that night. The next day, a plain envelope showed up in her mailbox. No stamp, no address. Just her name, scrawled in. Shaky handwriting, she opened it carefully. Inside was a single photo. It was recent, taken just days ago. It showed her sitting in her car outside the bunker. Someone had followed her, documented her every move. It was no longer just a story about a missing boy. It was a story about secrets ones she was never meant to uncover. But there was more. Behind the photo was a second slip of paper. Coordinates, again, but these pointed somewhere near a rural train station. Abandoned since the 80s, not far from the edge of the woods. Beneath the numbers were just 4 words. Come alone. July 11th, Claire. Circled the date on her calendar. 2 days now. She knew the risks. This could be a trap. But she also knew one thing. With absolute certainty, Daniel was still out there. And someone didn't want her to find him. The question that now haunted her wasn't just where Daniel was, but who else had known about him all along, and why did it feel like the people she trusted most had been keeping something from her? July 11th came faster than Claire expected. The morning was gray, with low clouds casting a dim light over the empty roads. She drove in silence, following the coordinates to the abandoned train station. The building was small, crumbling at the edges, with broken windows and rusted signage barely hanging on. It looked forgotten by time. But Claire knew it wasn't. She parked a few streets away and walked the rest of the distance, careful not to draw attention. The note had been clear. Come alone. Her heart pounded harder with each step. She didn't know who or what she was about to face. But the thought of seeing Daniel again pushed her forward. Inside, the station was eerily quiet. Dust coated every surface. Pieces of broken benches and shattered glass littered the floor. Claire's footsteps echoed through the wide, empty space. Then, from the far end, a voice. You came. She turned sharply, flashlight in hand. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall, older, wearing a long coat. It took her a moment to recognize him. Mr. Albridge, the neighbor. The man with the ring. Claire's voice shook. Where is my son? He didn't answer at first. Instead, he looked around as if making sure they were truly alone. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something smaller photograph. It was Daniel, taken recently. He looked healthy, older, with the same quiet eyes Claire remembered. He's safe, Albridge said calmly. But you weren't supposed to find him. Claire stepped closer, her emotions a mix of fear, anger, and desperation. What do you mean? Why him? Why any of this? He studied her carefully before replying. We were part of a group. We? Believed in finding special children, ones who could disappear without causing suspicion. We didn't hurt them. We prepared them. Claire repeated disbelief in her voice. Prepared them for what? Albridge didn't answer. Instead, he motioned toward a metal staircase leading down to what looked like an old maintenance tunnel. Claire hesitated, but followed. The air grew colder the farther they descended. The walls were damp and cracked, the lights dim and flickering. And then, at the end of the corridor, a door. Albridge unlocked it and stepped aside. Claire walked in, breath catching in her throat. It was a room clean, quiet, and filled with small beds, books, drawings. There were children inside, maybe 7 or 8 of them. And standing among them, older now, stronger, but unmistakably him, Daniel. He turned, saw her, and froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he ran to her, and she dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. 10 years of silence. And nightmares vanished in that moment. Tears filled her eyes. I found you, she whispered. Daniel clung to her, but when she pulled back to look at him, something was off. His face was calm. Too calm. I knew you'd come, he said softly. I just didn't know if it was time. Claire frowned. Time for what? Daniel looked back at the other children, then at Albridge. They trained us, taught us things, how to listen, how to hide, how to think like them. Claire's blood ran cold. Who are they? Albridge answered from behind. Not everyone involved knew the full truth. Some believed they were part of something good protecting the next generation. But there was another side, a darker purpose. Some of us tried to stop it. Others embraced it. Claire stood up, her body tense. Then why bring me here? Daniel stepped between them. Because I have a choice now, and I choose you. That Albridge's face changed. A flash of furor, was it regret? Then, suddenly, the sound of footsteps. Heavy, fast. More than one. Run. Daniel shouted. Claire grabbed his hand, and they bolted through the back door Albridge had entered. Through. The hallway behind led into another tunnel, dimly lit and damp. The sound of pursuit grew louder. Whoever was coming didn't care about staying quiet. They ran through a maze of corridors, Claire's lungs burning, Daniel guiding her with surprising confidence. They finally burst through an old service door and into the woods behind the station. Claire kept running until they were deep into the trees, where they collapsed behind a fallen log. The woods were silent again. Too silent. Claire turned to her son. Tell me everything now. Daniel looked at her, sadness in his eyes. They raised us for something, not just to be hidden. They believed we had ... potential, that some of us were different, smarter, more aware. We weren't allowed to leave, but I found a way to get word out. The Game Boy? The photo? I wanted you to find me. Claire tried to breathe evenly, processing every word. Why now? Daniel hesitated. Because not all the kids want to leave. Some still believe in the mission, and one of them is going to finish what the others started. Claire's heart dropped. What mission? Before he could answer, distant explosion shook the trees. A plume of smoke rose from the direction of the station. They destroyed the place, Daniel said, eyes wide. They're wiping it clean. No evidence, no more proof. Claire stood, her grip tightening on his hand. Then we have to go. Now, but just as they started moving again, a voice echoed through the trees. Daniel, it was a girl's voice. Maybe 13 or 14. Claire turned and saw her standing just beyond the trees, one of the children from the underground room. Her eyes were locked on Daniel. "You said you wouldn't leave us," she said, emotionless. Daniel stepped forward, then stopped. "I'm not leaving you, I'm leaving them." The girl didn't respond. She just watched, then turned and disappeared into the forest. Claire and Daniel didn't stop running until they reached the car. They drove 4 miles, not speaking. Finally, they stopped at a roadside diner. Claire called Harris and gave him everything: names, locations, descriptions. But even before she hung up, she knew the group would already be gone. Over the next few weeks, Claire and Daniel slowly began to rebuild their lives. He didn't talk much about the time he'd lost, and she didn't push. Some nights he woke up screaming, and other nights he stayed completely still, like he was listening for something. Then, one morning, a package arrived on their doorstep. No return address. Inside was a small metal box. Claire opened it slowly, heart racing. Inside was a silver ring. Daniel stared at it, expression unreadable, and beneath it, a note. "You can leave, Daniel, but you'll always be one of us." Claire held the ring in her hand for a long time, the cold metal pressing into her palm like a reminder that even though they had escaped, the story wasn't truly over. Daniel sat across from her, staring out the window. The sunlight caught in his hair, highlighting how much he'd changed, not just in age, but in the way he moved, the way he thought. He was no longer the little boy she remembered from that birthday party in 1991. He was someone who had lived through something no child should ever experience. And yet, he was here, alive. With her, she slipped the ring back into the box and closed the lid gently. "We don't have to talk about it now," she said softly. Daniel didn't look at her, but he nodded. "I just don't want them to find us again." "They won't," she promised, even though deep down she wasn't sure. Whatever group had taken him, whatever their purpose had been, they were organized, careful. They had erased every trace of their existence. But they hadn't expected Daniel to reach her. They hadn't expected a mother's determination. Over the next few months, Claire and Daniel slowly adjusted to a life that resembled something close to normal. They moved to a new town far from their old home. Claire quit her job and started working from home, wanting to be close, to make up for the lost time. Daniel enrolled in school under a different name. He was quiet, observant. Teachers noted how intelligent he was, how fast he picked things up. But he didn't make many friends. He kept to himself, always watching. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, saying names Claire didn't recognize, children he'd been with, instructors, places they'd been taken. Other times, he sat silently for hours, scribbling in notebooks or staring at the stars. Claire didn't ask too many questions. When he was ready, she'd listen. But she never wanted to push him back into a place of fear. Detective Harris stayed in touch, though there was little he could offer beyond reassurance. Every tip they followed led nowhere. The bunker beneath the old station had been completely destroyed in the fire. No remains, no records, no fingerprints. It was like it had never existed. But Claire knew better. And so did Daniel. One afternoon, Claire found Daniel in the garage, sorting through the old items they had brought with them in boxes, some photos, keepsakes, and the Game Boy. He held it in his hand. Turning it slowly, "I've been thinking," he said. "That message? I'm not lost. I'm waiting. It wasn't just for you. It was for them too. I wanted them to know I wasn't like them, that I could choose." Claire walked over and sat beside him. "And you did choose." Daniel looked at her. "I just don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Claire smiled gently. "You live, you grow. You get to decide who you are, not them. That's what matters." They sat in silence for a while. And for the first time, Claire saw a glimmer of peace in his eyes. As the seasons passed, they created new routines, Sunday breakfasts at the local diner, evening walks by the river. Simple things, healing things. Daniel started writing, filling journal after journal with his thoughts. Eventually, he told Claire he wanted to share his story not for attention, but to help others who might be lost, too. Maybe it wouldn't bring down the people who had taken him, but it might bring light into the darkness they had created. Claire supported him. They worked together, carefully choosing what to share and what to protect. The story gained quiet traction on message boards, forums about unsolved mysteries, long-lost children. Some believed, others didn't. But it wasn't about that. It was about truth, about breaking the silence. Then, one day, a letter arrived. No return address, just a single sheet of paper. It read, "He's not the only one who remembers. There are more. We're safe for now, but we're watching. And we're waiting." There was no signature, but Claire understood what it meant. Daniel read it and folded the paper carefully, placing it in his journal. "They're still out there," he said. Claire nodded. "So are we." Years passed. Daniel grew into a young man, strong and steady. He spoke at a local event once, quietly recounting parts of his past, urging communities to look closer, to ask questions, to never stop searching for those who disappear. People listened. And while he never gave his full name, his message found its way into hearts and minds. Claire, too, found peace not because everything was fixed, but because she had her son back. She knew they couldn't change the past, but they could shape what came next. Sometimes when Daniel walked past a toy store or heard the theme from a video game, he would pause and remember, not just the pain, but the hope that had kept him going. The knowledge that someone out there loved him enough to keep searching, no matter how long it took. And sometimes, Claire would find him sitting quietly on the porch at night, watching the stars. "They used to tell us to look up," he said once, "that it made the world feel bigger, made us feel small, easier to control." Claire leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "But you're not small anymore, and you're not theirs." Daniel smiled softly. "No, I'm not." The ring stayed locked away in a box. They never spoke of it again. Life went on. Not perfectly, but honestly. And in the end, the story that had begun with a birthday party in 1991 a day meant for joy. Stolen by darkness became a story of light, of survival, and of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. They had found each other, and that was enough.